So now we will conclude our today's session here in the premises of the Academy of Athens with two wonderful scientists and human beings as well. It's my privilege and honor to be also friends of these two people who have, what time is it, Andreas, now in Boston? It must be very, very early in the morning.
It is 6:21 in the morning.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry for that. So Andreas Mershin, Dr. Andreas Mershin is a distinguished researcher in MIT. He will present himself also because his CV is very long and I wouldn't like to miss anything to Andreas. And Dr. Also Dimitrios Ioannidis is a colleague, also distinguished attorney of law, working in research projects with Andreas also apart from his capacity as a lawyer, as attorney at law. So thank you so much. Good morning. And
good morning. Could you enable screen share because we cannot?
Yes.
Oh, it is working now. Perfect.
Yes, our technician just made that available. So thank you so much for joining us. We were a bit off time. We should be already in our break. No rush. I know that you have we had programmed like 30 minutes here, but if you would be like kind enough to make it a bit shorter, also to have some questions.
I was shortening it as the other people were speaking. I was cutting out slides.
And so
I know it's before lunch, so we have to go quick.
Yes,
I promise it'll be fun.
Apologies for that, but you know better. So thank you so much, Andreas. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dimitri, would you like to say something first? And then I will go into my slides because I know you don't have slides today.
No, Kalimera. First of all, thank you.
Kalimera.
Let's say it's, I'm just going to make a few comments right after you finish, Andreas. So,
okay. So I start then? All right. So, Kalimera says, Kalo apogevma mallon. I will do this speech in Greek, and please interrupt if you have any questions. Sorry, something.
Andreas, I thought that your speech today would be in English since we also have an audience of 10.
I meant in English. I'm going to do it in English.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm having a bit of an issue here. Hold on, give me a second. Stop share. Just a second. All right, here we go. Okay, so Zoom. Nope. One moment. Share screen. This. Share. PowerPoint. Start. Okay, can everybody see my slides? Yes? Dimitri, yes? Can you see it?
Yes, that's okay. A yes, yeah.
So today I want to talk about the concept of Turing equivalence and how it impacts our understanding of artificial dog intelligence, specifically with the application in mind of cancer diagnostics. Let me first say that I am from MIT. I've been at MIT 19 years. I'm a research scientist and the director of the MIT Label-Free Research Group. I'm also an instructor at the MIT Sloan Executive Education series of courses where I teach the course called Lab to Market the MIT Way, where we explain to high-level, C-level executives and government officials how to understand innovation and how to not stop it and how to allow it to bring fruits. This would be something very interesting for Greece also. We know now that many interesting things are happening. I'm the president and co-founder of the Osmo Cosmo Foundation, which you will notice with the Greek colors and the Greek word, two words, Osmo Cosmo, Osmi ke Cosmos, or Cosmos tis Osmis. And I'm also a director of MicroHab, which is something we will talk about in the next couple of sessions. In both of those, I'm joined by Dimitri, and if it was not for him, neither of those two will exist. A couple of things about my lab. Over the last 19 years, we've been focusing on defocusing. That means we specialize in not specializing. We keep a beginner's mind. We try to enter into fields which we don't know much about and bring in a new perspective, make an impact, and get out. For instance, this here is a very small device, costs a few cents, and it allows for the transplantation of single genomes. $100 million problem that we're attempting to solve with a few cent device. We will talk today about this, which is an olfactory platform. That means olfaction is a fancy word for the sense of smell. So machine olfaction and artificial intelligence based on the dogs. The next couple of days, we'll also talk about this, which has to do with how to grow mushrooms into houses. So I want to have a good shout out to my friend and colleague and past postdoc, Philippos Tourlamousis, a Greek person who has now started a company based on this in Greece and is doing fantastic things for Greek science. He has printed fibers onto which you can immobilize stem cells that then can be controlled as to their differentiation. We wrote a paper together back in 2019, and the Economist called it the breakthrough technology of 2019. And then, of course, COVID came and everything stopped, but it's restarted. So today we will honor and talk about one of my favorite people on this planet, Alan Turing. Never met him. He is the reason we think that the Allies won the Second World War, because he figured out the Enigma machine, the way that the Nazis were coding their messages to their submarines and other forces, and the Allies had information before the Germans thought that was secret. He did so by believing very strongly that he could make machines that could think, or at least compute in a way that we now recognize to be the birth of digital computing. Now, I want to remind you of two things that have happened since Turing. Of course, he has a tragic story. You should all watch the movie called The Imitation Game, which is what was the original name for what's called Turing Equivalence. Turing test. The Turing test is as follows. If you have, let's say, trained scientists who are trained at identifying who is human and who is a machine, and they're chatting online, that means they're just typing and somebody else is typing from the other side of the connection, but they cannot see that other. It could be a different room, it could be a different side of the planet. You're just chatting like you would. And sometimes the other person or the other participant in this experiment is a machine, a chatbot, and sometimes it's a human. And the task for the human scientist is to decide whether they're talking to a machine or a human. If you do this 100 times, and on average, you get about 50-50 chance of getting it correctly, that means that whatever chatbot is being employed on the other side, it has passed what's called the Turing test, or it's about to pass the Turing test. If you think that the chatbot is always human, then it has really passed the test. Now, you would think that this is actually very hard. It is not hard at all. The Turing test has been passed hundreds and probably thousands of times by different codes, by different chatbots. It is, in fact, one of the tests given to undergraduate students at MIT in many courses is to write a chatbot that will pass the Turing test. It's nothing special. How you should interpret this is not that the machines are so smart, it's that the humans are so dumb. We are very lusty for connection. We always project anthropomorphism on everything, and we're trying to find a meaning. And we assign meaning so generously to anything, pretty much, to even random patterns of stars. We assign all sorts of interesting meanings to the constellations, etc., that we assign meaning to whatever comes out of our screen. So it is not hard to pass the Turing test. It is an interesting data point as to how humans think, the fact that it's easy to pass with today's technology. But at the same time, there's something more fundamental there. If you don't care about whether you're talking to a human or a machine, and only you care about what's happening during this conversation, then you might actually be very well served by talking to a machine instead of a human. Is that not true? So when you find out what do you care about, you expand the concept of Turing test to Turing equivalence. That means, do you care about the result, or do you care about who is doing the work? So with that in mind, let's ask ourselves about a very, very controversial yet very hot topic right now. Who can invent? According to many court systems in the world, who invents gets inventorship in the patent system, which means that you have to put a name of a person, because the court systems on the planet have decided that conception is integral to invention, and conception can only happen in a human mind. Although the European court system has questioned that, and in Australia and South Africa, this person here, my co-founder of a company called Sentient and friend for many years, Stephen Fowler, about whom this economist again wrote an article claiming that he was in love with his own software, which I don't think is true, but I do know that he has created this software that has been given personhood in the legal system, in the eyes of the law, as far as inventorship is concerned, in 2 jurisdictions. So this asks the question, Turing equivalence. Do you care about who invented, or do you care whether the invention is good? There's different aspects to that. Sometimes the lawyers, for instance, will care about who invented. The inventors will care about who invented because they might be able to get paid if they're attributed the invention. But if you are the consumer, do you care if a machine or a human invented the next medicine or the next airplane, which is safer, or the next car, which is better, etc.? No, you really care about the result. So ask yourselves about this every time that you're thinking about something. Start the thinking process by asking, well, in this particular endeavor, when is Turing equivalence reached, and which part of it do I care about? So Alexander Graham Bell told us, we're shifting gear now to show you how this idea of the Turing equivalence applies to the very specific application of machine olfaction. That means just like we have machine vision, which reproduces eyeballs, here we have machine olfaction, which reproduces a nose. So I have been fighting with this adage for many years. At first I thought it was nonsense, that you don't need a new science to explain olfaction. Then after understanding quantum physics with a great big help of Professor Nanopoulos, who was my PhD advisor, and I know he's in the audience. Thank you for sharing the brilliance. Then I thought, oh my God, yes, we need a new science. Now I'm somewhere in between. But basically, I've arrived at this. I've realized that a good way of understanding anything is to build it. So I started building this. And if you don't know what that is, it's this. It is the tricorder from the Star Trek television show, where you could detect various things, and I thought it was a nose. So now what could be the applications of such a thing, of a nose or a bioelectronic nose? Of course, you've seen bombs and drugs and dead people or living people found under rubble after earthquakes by trained dogs. And anything a trained dog can do, which they do via the smell, or the sense of smell mostly, although they do integrate their other senses as well, we can now replicate, at least in the lab, not on the marketplace yet. You can also perhaps be looking for water, various fossil fuels. Having a good understanding of olfaction, obviously requires a theory of olfaction, which is currently missing, but it would also help a lot with diagnostics, drug manufacturing, and drug discovery. I got into this business in 2005 because I read this paper from 2004, where this dog here was shown to have a higher than random rate of success. And even though this isn't very high, it only had a 41% success rate. The reason it was so low was because this dog kept misidentifying a urine sample that was given as a control. That means from someone who had been given the okay from the hospital. And yet the dog kept misidentifying that as having bladder cancer. So the person whose urine that was the dog knew the experiment was happening, and they were freaked out a little bit, as you would. So they kept getting checked. And finally, months later, the hospital came back with a very early stage bladder cancer diagnosis, which was, of course, a complete fluke. And it's a well-known case now. Even a book has been written about it called Daisy's Gift by Claire Guest, who is the PI on this. So the fact that the dog knew something before the hospital did intrigued me. Now, as a scientist, you're not supposed to go after n equals 1. You're supposed to wait until more data comes, but I couldn't. I couldn't sleep after I saw this. Then I also saw that dogs can learn to generalize based on one cancer that generalize to other cancers, which is fundamentally a non-analytical endeavor. The fact that they can do this means that they're not going by molecular analysis, but they're going by the perceptual character. So to explain this, let's first of all understand that to the dog, the world looks like this, okay? Everything, in addition to what we can see with our eyes, the dog can actually smell the world, and 60% of its brain equivalent that we would use for vision, the dog uses for olfaction. All these things that are coming out of your, you can see even a plume coming out of my mouth. This is a simulation. This is not what's really happening. This is just a simulation of a piece of art that we have at MIT. But imagine that you're constantly leaving this trail of biologically relevant information, and it can be mined. It can be mined to the tune of where you can tell if somebody is sick. If they have COVID, you can tell, dogs can tell with 99.5% precision in 0.4 seconds at the airport. That means with a lot of environmental olfactory noise. And the fact that you can tell these things, and also many other things, many personal things, such as, for instance, whether somebody is pregnant, what sex they're carrying. If you have access also to the potential fathers, you can tell who the father is. Those are, in addition to what your cancer or COVID state is, in addition to what your mental health state is, you can tell your reproductive state. So these are becoming very personal, very potent pieces of information that those with the ability to sense them can kind of have a huge advantage. And of course, it can be abused. That's where Dimitri and the Osmocosm Foundation come in. We've decided that we need to get the laws ahead of the game here because it is becoming quite quite out there. So let me first explain to you something about smell that you might not understand. Everybody thinks still to this day of smell as just these molecules flying around, and it's true that the molecules are conferring the sense of smell, but it's the sense of smell itself is a language. Same as vision is a language. It elicits behavior, and there's messages you can transmit to your eyeballs, similar to your ears, similar to your nose. Ask yourself this. This is I have 3 children now, but this is my daughter and this is my son when he was newborn. She's holding him up front. So this is a perspective error, okay? His head is not bigger than her head. It's like this. So I was changing his diaper and my daughter walks in. She was probably 3 or so. And she says, what's that smell, Daddy? So my instinct was to point to the diaper. This is what we do when we ask when somebody says, what's that smell? You point to an object that's emitting the smell. And then I was going to, of course, as a scientist, go and say, oh, it's also the indole and this cattle, the molecules that are the byproducts of bacterial activity, which, you know, the et cetera, et cetera. Thankfully, I took a breath and slowed down, and which I find hard to do. But something with the kids is quite brilliant. They teach you a lot. So I slowed down, and instead of answering the question, I asked her back. She says, what's that smell, Daddy? And I say, what does that smell tell you? What's that smell, Daddy? What does it tell you? I don't want to eat it. Oh, now we know something. That smell, that aversive, unpleasant smell, has a very strong behavioral result. It cuts out your appetite. Now, why? Of course, because as a signal of bacterial activity and degradation, if that is happening in that wherever you are, you better not be eating or even opening your mouth wide and gulping it down, because just like the ancient people thought miasma, you know, the smell is a source of disease, they were right. Even though we poo-pooed it for a while, we said, oh, it's the germs. Yeah, the germs actually let us know of their presence by that smell. Okay, so don't eat poop. And don't worry, because most people are born with this innate. Now, can it change? Yes, of course it can change. If, let's say, your survival depended on sniffing out where the poop is because somehow, I don't know, you were looking for diamonds in it, then you would actually start looking for it. Instead of avoiding it, you'd be attracted to it. So it is something you can reprogram. However, biology sets you up with a very good tool. Now, drilling deeper, this is a very good paper, also by a Greek scientist, Makis Koulakis, who I believe is in Greece now. And it was inspired by work we did with Dimitrios, which has to do with whether we can train Drosophila, fruit flies, to trigger on vibrational states of a molecule, which would normally be something very crazy, because if you do this with deuterated molecules, it's like asking whether the Drosophila can actually do nuclear physics. And it doesn't, because of this Turing equivalence. It was such an important finding to see that you can train flies to behave as if they're following a vibrational peak in the molecule, that it was covered by Science and Nature on the same day that we published it in PNAS. Those are the 3 top journals on the planet, and they all covered it. The first one published and the other 2 covered it on the same day. I don't think I've ever seen that happen before or since in my life. So this is how much interest there is in this problem in science before we even get to applications. But now let's look at applications. So we know that trained dogs are the earliest, most accurate disease detectors on the planet for anything that's ever been tried. My colleagues here, this is Claire Guest, this is the previous Queen of England, and this is the current Queen of England. So I've met them both. And the previous Queen of England held this, which is this, if you can see it. This is the prop of the bioelectronic nose that we've built. Here's a dog that has been trained on detecting Parkinson's disease. And I want you to pay attention to how insistent it will be on clicking on that 3rd stand. So this dog, in each one of those jars, there's a neck swab. So you have swabbed the necks of people with and without Parkinson's. And here is something very interesting. Notice how the handler waits a little bit before they click the button to reward the dog. The dog knows that once the button is clicked, the reward is coming. Here's the dog interacting with the 3rd stand, which was the one with Parkinson's. You can clearly see it if you just measure the interaction, but you can also see it with your eyeballs. If you're a handler, you don't need this machine readout. You can just see it with your eyes. Now, here are 3 decoys. This is what the dog does when none of the 3 have the disease. So you saw that when it was triggering on the correct one, it was kind of pushing 3 times. And the handler waited a little bit. That was a moment of brilliance. What Claire Guest and her trainers, dog trainers at Medical Detection Dogs UK, which is a charity in Milton Keynes, UK, supported by the previous queen and the current queen of England. Amongst they don't give them money; they give them fame, but the people of Britain support them with small donations. Very, very good charity, very excellent research. So what they're doing is they're gauging the certainty with which the dog is identifying this by looking at the frustration of the dog. The dog knows, I am certain, I want my treat right now, and that's why it keeps pushing 3 times. If it was not so certain, it would have pushed once, and then maybe it would have changed its mind because, oh, maybe the handler didn't notice that I pushed on the wrong thing. Maybe I'll get the treat anyway. So this is a very brilliant way of how you can learn how to teach some machine to do something by looking at how they're training dogs. And to learn how to train the dog best and how to read the dog is a tremendously technological feat. You know, we're reading sensors that we designed. Here's them reading a sensor that nature designed and learning so much about it. What the dog does that no analytical sensor can do is that it gives you context. It is aware of context. Convince yourselves that A and B are the same color here. Do you see how your brain is telling you this is darker than this? It's forcing you to think, but it is the same color. Why is your brain telling you that these two are different? Because of the context. If you hide this, if you just do this with your eyes and just look at the line, you'll see that it's the same color. The context is what's informing your misconception that this is a different color than that. Now, this is exactly what the dogs can also do. What no analytical tool can do is understand that if you train me on a flower and you send me in the city, I need to find you the flower store, even if it has no roses. And if you do the same for me in the flower store, I will find you the rose, or I will say there's no rose here. The fact that it can do this is amazing. Now, very quickly now to finish this, I want to put up this board. This is the board that was left on Richard Feynman's board when he died, the last day of his life. This is what he had on his blackboard in Caltech. So it says up here, what I cannot create, I do not understand. And I agree with this. So in my group, we flip this and we say, build it to understand it. Now, this is how nature does smell. Your snout is this, that's not your nose. Your nose is up here, it's between your eyeballs. It's where people often think the third eye is, although that's the pineal gland in most cultures. And odorant molecules coupled to receptors, which are on these neurons that are going through your cribriform plate, which is a little gap in your, a little slit in your skull. So your brain is literally putting projections into your epithelium there. It's literally directly with your brain that you're interacting. Those, you have 404 of these receptors, each represented thousands and millions of times in this epithelium. And what happens is everything's dynamic. These are 7 transmembrane domain receptors. This is a proper molecular dynamic simulation. Took over a year to do. So what happens when you smell something? These molecules fall into a sensing pocket, and as a result of a connection, the dance of these legs changes and the shape of the molecule changes. So 100% of the crystallography that was done on these GPCRs, freezing them and trying to see how it works because we can do it is incorrect, because the dynamics is what's really important. Then you can take these proteins, immobilize them on semiconductors, put them between a source and a drain, and create these architectures that are now called field effect transistors. They've been known for 40 years. And you can then pass air on top of it and get these kind of graphs that then, with artificial intelligence, you can make into sent objects that can be recognized. This is the machine that we built for DARPA. It's the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency of the United States government, the Pentagon. This beat the dog by a factor of 200, but it was big. And now we've been shrinking it with GlaxoSmithKline sponsorships. We've shrunk it to be smaller than what your smartphone is currently. And we are launching a new company called Real Nose to capitalize on this and make these noses. Now, if you want to have fantastic content about this, please visit osmocosm.org, my and Dimitrios' creation. And there's fantastic and interesting videos there that you can see. And there's also sentient.ai. If you watch the 1-minute video there, you'll be able to understand what the future looks like once you can start diagnosing disease with the same prowess as dogs can. I have a couple more things to show, including videos, but I will stop now because it's been 21 minutes and give 9 minutes for questions and for Dimitri. And I know that we're a little bit short on time. So I'll stop here and thank you and give me some questions, please. By the way, the last thing is let's do a quick thing of what we covered. We covered that machine olfaction gives us diagnostic superpowers. The nanonodes was a case of build it to understand it. And if you think about it, that concept of building something in order to understand it works for almost anything. And I want you to start asking yourselves, what is this Turing equivalence? To tell you how to think about this, just understand this in order to not fool yourself. When you delve into this world, you find that doctors will say, well, I don't want the diagnosis from the dog. I don't want the diagnosis from this machine that I don't understand how it sniffed out the cancer. But they're only saying this because they don't understand. If you gave them a black box and said, okay, there's some lab out there that does this, and then here's statistically the results, and your results are as good as the dog results, or as good as a urologist biopsy results, then at that point you have to logically and honestly admit to yourself you reached Turing equivalence. And even though you don't understand the machine or you're afraid of it, you equally don't understand what the doctor is doing or other diagnostics. So please don't fool yourself.
Thank you so much, Andreas. That was exciting as always. So first of all, a big applause for you. I hope it reaches you out until Boston. Dimitrios was supposed also to be here today with us. Unfortunately, due to a visa issue, he couldn't make it. So is there any question now here from the audience for Andreas for the presentation he had? I think your professor here wants to begin, Dimitrios.
Hi, Andreas. Congratulations for this talk. Hi, Dimitrios.
Hello.
What I wanted to ask you, all these things that you continue doing, are you using there this thing that it is still with a quantum relation? I mean, you somehow...
Only philosophically, I have to say, only philosophically. Let me tell you why, because I'm so glad you asked this. See, my professor is here to remind me of our very good past together. Let me tell you why. The only place where it's still kind of important is this. So this here is essentially the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in olfaction. Why? Because it tells you can't smell something without changing it. This is the molecule before you smell it. This is the molecule after you smell it. Just like you can't look at something without changing it. You can't smell something without changing it. That is extremely important in olfaction, extremely important. I keep telling everybody, this is HUP. This is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in olfaction. Or I tell them it's actually also the same as Newton's third law. You can't act upon anything. You can only interact with something. You can act on it, and whatever you think the world is doing to you, you're doing the same thing back to the world with equal magnitude in opposite direction. So that way, physics is absolutely key to here. But all that other stuff that we were trying to figure out has not quite, it's not apparent in the technology yet. But it's definitely part of the thinking. Yeah.
Thank you. And congratulations again.
Is there any other question from the audience for Dr. Andreas or Mershin? So Dimitri, maybe the floor is yours now. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Olga. Good to see you again. How can I continue after the presentation of Andreas? But as a lawyer, one of the things that I always find fascinating is that, lawyers kind of tend to think of the past. We always look things that happen in the past, and we never think of things that can happen in the future. So what I also kind of think about as I work with Andreas on many different projects is that I have to change my focus a little bit. Not only do I have to be a little creative, but I also have to think of the future, which engages me to become a little more sort of creative and inspired. Lawyers, I say, are typically very boring and they're bored. Those two things do not make us really be very creative. I also want to touch upon a couple of things that were talked about during the panel presentation. Everybody keeps talking about this principle of AI, artificial intelligence, which to me seems to be a little bit archaic. Again, we're talking about something that has been used in the past. Artificial means something that has wires. It's sort of mechanical in nature. And now we're at a point in time where I think we have to think about changing that phrase and use autonomous intelligence. Andreas talked about, somebody that we have worked with that is sort of developing now this idea of recognizing AI or autonomous intelligence as personhood. And that, of course, is going to change the world. The other point that I wanted to talk about with respect to some of the things that I heard about is what comes first? What should come first, innovation or legislation? And I think one of the panel presenters before us mentioned this idea of sort of kind of waiting for things to kind of happen, the marketplace takes over, and then innovation, legislation follows that innovation. I think that is again, probably a failing approach when it comes to innovation, because lawyers, we really don't understand it. We don't understand technology very well. We don't understand the ins and outs of these technological things. As I listen to Andreas, and I've listened to this before many, many times, each and every time I find something more interesting, something I didn't realize, something I don't understand. And I have a hard time putting all that stuff into perspective. Now, when it comes to the topic of discussion today, which is obviously the artificial nose, as far as I am concerned, and osmocosm, we are interested in kind of creating, for me at least, the legal framework of capturing this biological data that Andreas is talking about. If we think of our bodies secreting and always pushing out some type of biological data that is this type of smell, and we are close to a point of being able to smell somebody who is pregnant, who whether or not they carry a boy or a girl, and who the father may be if they're in that type of room. And I think, Olga, you were talking about data and how you have been interested in data. So the question now is, what happens with that data, this smell data, the olfactory data? Who owns that? Who controls it? As soon as it comes out of our body, is it our smell if it travels 1 foot away or 2 feet away, or it goes further out? Is it in the public domain? Now, as soon as we capture that data, and obviously we now have sensors that are doing that, who controls that data? In order to answer these questions, as part of Osmocosm, Andreas and I work on creating moot court problems. These are law school problems that we tend to have in law schools, where I sort of write these problems with the futuristic idea. So I kind of come up with these stories that happen in space, and the reason for that is that gives me a place where there's no jurisdiction. I don't have to rely on European Union law, the US law, and the differences between the systems. I use a system whereby there's no particular legislation. And I begin to ask questions that are very relevant to olfaction. Now, we've done this a couple of years. In each conference, I've kind of written a problem that includes all these questions. And I try to kind of do it in a civil context where the question is civil in nature. And last year I did it on a criminal type of a case. And I'll tell you some of the questions that I was sort of trying to come up with, aside from data. Can we smell the mental state or the intent of a person as they are either committing a crime or as they are executing a contract? If we have these sensors and the human body now gives that biological data and we have the ability to capture it, what happens then? Can we figure that mental state? Now, I know that in Israel, there's a lot of research on, for instance, the smell of fear. They're doing research on that particular thing, the smell of trust. They're able to sort of look at these things and kind of figure these human sort of characteristics. And if we get to the point of where we are able to analyze all this information, can we introduce in court that type of information as a way to prove the mental state or the intent of a person when they sign a contract or when they commit a crime? So these are some of the questions that we kind of talk about. Now, last year, I also had a question as to whether or not we can refresh the memory of a witness through a scent. So if we have some kind of a scent, can we use that? Now, the US law is sort of clear on this. Yes, we can do it. Whether or not we actually can manage it and how technologically we can do that is a different type of a question. And of course, data is very, 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 very important as we are developing this, because there's nothing out there regulatory that talks about the data protection or what happens with data that comes out of our body. So now I also included some questions that relate to things that, once the data comes out, who is in control? Is it going to be up in the cloud? And if we are able to kind of bring that data and goes up somewhere, where is that going to be stored? And how are we going to deal with things like that? And these are some of the questions that I'm interested in. And we do this moot court competition every year. We have one coming up in October 19, 20, and 21 at the MIT Media Lab. And for this October, the problem I'm working on is gene editing and whether or not we can have gene editing in the sense of now creating or forcing the human body to bring out more smells that relate to some of these, the fears, the guilt, things like that. And once we can now reprogram genes to bring that smell out and we capture it, are we in a safer world? Because we now know who has fear, who has guilt, who has this and that. And that sounds a little futuristic, but at the end of the day, I don't want to be the typical lawyer where I always think of the past. I want to think of the future, and I want to see where we're going to be 50 years from now, 100 years from now. I did write a law review article last year in 2022 on this issue. Will artificial intelligence replace arbitrators under the American law? And I use this type of a forum to kind of think about technologies, emerging technologies, and how we can bring it all together. The challenge for lawyers is to become and to continue to be relevant in a world where technology is advancing very, very rapidly. And of course, as lawyers, we have a hard time keeping up with technology. And that is the challenge, obviously, one of the questions that I will be talking about next Wednesday. So that's all I have to say at this point in time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dimitris. Is there perhaps any question from the audience? Yeah, I can see a colleague here who's also about to be a doctor in a few years' time from now. Alexandra Zyaka, also an attorney at law.
Hello. Thank you very much, both of you. Your speech was exciting. So I'm a lawyer, so I could not help but making a legal question. I was really excited about what you said, Mr. Ioannidis, about the identification of mental states. That could even lead to the identification of thought. What do you think should be the criteria for a legal and ethical use of this data? I mean, consent would be adequate. Should we add more criteria? Yeah, thank you.
It's a very good question. That has not been answered as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, sure, consent is an issue. However, consent typically means an affirmative type of an act. We understand, but if our human body kind of brings all these smells out uncontrollably, where do we know where consent comes in? So that's a very interesting question. Consent is important.
And also, most people won't know what they're consenting to. One idea, sorry to jump in on this, but it's a super important thing that you bring out. One idea at the one end of the spectrum is that your scent is like your footprints. You leave your footprints behind you, that's it. That's no longer yours. At the other end of the spectrum is that your scent is as yours as your body, like as your blood results, for instance, your blood test results, that level of privacy. Well, the truth is probably somewhere in between, because there is something to be said about, if you're leaving it behind, you can mask it, you can take steps to not leave so much scent behind. However, it is fundamentally biologically impossible to stop it from happening without putting you in a spacesuit or something like this. I want to consider it from something that we know already, which is when we record photons, we call that a picture or a video. When we record smells, we call that osmodata. We haven't got a name for a smell picture, or smell video yet, but it's coming. So I want to start from saying that, all the pictures in my phone are my pictures. You cannot steal them from my phone and then start using them for any purpose to advertise, diapers in India, which used to happen for people who had uploaded pictures in various social media sites. Pictures of their babies would be stolen and used for advertisement campaigns in other countries. So there's laws now to prevent this. I want our scent to be to begin with, at least to be considered as our copyright, that you made it, your body made it. Maybe it wasn't conscious, but you made it. Therefore, it is primarily yours and you have responsibility for it. That means if your smell is annoying everybody or preventing everybody from doing something, well, it's your responsibility to stop it. And the law will actually say this: nuisance smells are actually legally a legal matter. You can enforce action against somebody who's creating a nuisance smell, or a malodor, as we call it. Well, let's start from there and then deal it back in, because I want when this makes it into our cell phones. In fact, here's the first smartphone that has a nose. There's a little nose here. It is a very rudimentary nose. Won't tell you disease yet, but it tells you a little bit. When that happens, when that future comes, I want to be able to participate. I want us all to be able to participate. I don't want some conglomerate just mining my data for money. I want to be able to annotate my own data. I want to be able to benefit from the fact that other people are also annotating their data. I want to be able to see the pandemic boundaries. I want to be able to scan my environment for threats, all these things. And I want to be able to share it. Now, if people are starting to make money off of my personal scent, and if I do work to annotate it, like we do work with taking pictures of our pets, now I'm taking pictures of my scent and I'm saying, I ate this, I took this medicine, this is what happened to my scent. That is supremely valuable to insurance companies, to pharmaceutical research companies, to universities, to everyone. For that, I should be getting paid. And just as we think of YouTube creation as a content creation, if you upload something to YouTube, you might be able to get a little bit of money when YouTube makes money. The same thing should apply to our scents. They are valuable in the right hands that can transform the world. They're a superpower, and everybody who creates and contributes to this should get a cut of it. That's how we accelerate this technology. Just like YouTube, content creation, your body smell, you can be sitting there doing nothing, just take a picture of it, upload it, somebody's gonna give you money because it's very valuable.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of generative AI, because you said that, as soon as we smell something and we bring it out again, it changes. So now what happens to that copyright?
It's like everybody, if you smell somebody's perfume after they've inhaled it, it's actually informed by their body. So it's actually a very intimate act to smell something after somebody else has smelled it already. Anyway.
These are good points, Alexandra. You're welcome to kind of contact us, and we'll give you some of the.
I want to thank Olga also in the crowd. I think they need to go to lunch. It's late now.
Great. Is there any other question from the audience? I can see, yeah. I can see one here. What would be your name?
Hello, thank you for the interesting presentation. My name is Malvina Wojcik. I'm a PhD in law in the University of Bologna and the University of Luxembourg. And I really like that you mentioned the proactive legal approach to these issues. But how do we go about that? Do you think that the instruments for data protection that we have now, like GDPR or HIPAA in the US, are adequate, or do we need more legislation? And is more legislation an answer in these difficult questions? Thank you.
Yeah, so the way I kind of think about that, thank you for the question. The way I think about it is that now a lot of times when it comes to technology, we are legislating from the bench. So what basically happens is innovation comes out, goes into the marketplace, then we get litigation that kind of happens, and then we get it into the court system, and we have older judges that still use flip phones perhaps to kind of decide these very difficult concepts. And we don't really have the ability to kind of deal with it earlier. What I suggest is that innovation and legislation have to go hand in hand. And I suggest that lawyers have to be intimately involved at sort of innovating from the get-go, from the beginning. We cannot let the economy to kind of happen. So I suggest a little bit of a different approach, because right now, what basically happens, and this is what I ask, in my lectures when I go to law schools, I ask the law students, do you know where the engineering school of your school is? Have you ever been there? Do you know what they're working on? And you always get the same type of an answer. No, no, no. And if you were to go to the engineering school and ask the engineering students the same questions, you would get the same answer. So basically we have great educational boxes that do not communicate. And we have to start from the education of it. So one of the things that was said at the beginning is, the question in the panel presentation, Olga was asked the question of, how did you get into this? What was the big bang that you had? And she said, some kind of a cafeteria meeting or whatever. Well, my big bang was Andreas. So I suggest if you're thinking about law, go become friends with a scientist, because that will open your mind. Don't be friends with just lawyers. So I think we have to now change our approach to education, where we have to make it truly interdisciplinary. break down those walls in the buildings that we have and have communication and be able to kind of be inspired and be creative and think about these questions that you're asking outside of the box and not in the normal kind of a way that we are educated now. Because if you go to law schools and you see how students are educated today, oh my God, it's such a boring method of teaching law students. Instead of kind of bringing all these emerging technologies and making them think of the future. And that's how I think we have to deal with these issues.
Thank you, Dimitrios. I will take your copyright on the flip-flop with the telephone of the judges. Because, yeah, when you go to courtrooms in Greece, it's the same situation as in the States, I guess. So another question here, all the way from the European Commission, and Ms. Danai Spetsu.
Thank you. So I'm Danai. I'm actually also a lawyer, but I'm working in the European Parliament at the moment. And to just complement the question and the discussion at the moment is that we have a new tool now after the GDPR, the European Health Data Space, that is ongoing and being drafted now. But if I can give you, it's true, what we do in the law school is very boring, but also in reality, sometimes we have a lot of boxes that they're not connecting to each other. So during the procedure that we're now drafting this specific legislation, we were constantly coming up with discussions from other scientific sectors for in silicon devices and clinical trials, extended reality devices. And it seems that even if we know these type of technologies, we cannot really introduce them and include them in the specific legal framework. We really have to reconstruct everything and think all over and be more creative. So it's very challenging procedure and action. But it's very interesting to have these type of discussions and collaboration, because this would definitely give a direction towards the right direction.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, again, first of all, I do invite all of the people that ask questions to kind of see if they want to join us with Osmocosm, because this is the beginning of a new idea. We have the conference, like I said, in October. Anybody's welcome to come and meet us in person and kind of be part of what we are doing. It's a valid question when it comes to sort of thinking about emerging legislative agendas in a little bit of a different kind of a way. But my problem is that we don't really, as lawyers, we don't really understand the startup worlds, for instance, some of the ideas that are coming up, and that is a failing approach. We have to really be engaged from the beginning of innovation. At least that's what my approach is. And while I understand that some legislative measures are necessary and they're coming up, they do not solve the problem. Legislation alone does not solve the problems. I think it takes a little more than that. So, on Wednesday, the lecture that I will be talking about is the future of a lawyer and whether or not we are relevant and whether or not we can exist. And the question will be, do we have a future? Are we going to exist as lawyers in the next 50 years? Thank you.